Welcome to Life List, a birding podcast.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is George Armistead with Life List, a birding podcast, and we're doing something a little bit different today. We're talking with two good friends of mine, both with a lot of guiding experience, both with a lot of Alaska experience. We're going to talk about Alaska today. I am here with both Alex Harper and Phil Chaon. Really good to be here with you guys. Alex, maybe let's start with you. You want to give folks a little bit of an intro to yourself and what you've been doing lately.
Hey, George, thanks for having me here. What's up, Phil? I just got back from Alaska a couple days ago. I was in Southeast after coming back from Barrow, Uktiavik, and Nome, where I was birding with you for about 10 days back in June. And I'm in Las Vegas right now. That's where I live. That's where I spend most of the year. And I had a really great 5 weeks in Alaska doing mostly guiding. Got back the other day and, it's pretty tough to come back from a trip like that to Las Vegas in the middle of the summer. Not a lot is happening here in the summer, but was able to get out to Lake Mead National Recreation Area just a few days ago and see why I love the desert, even in the summer. Because I went to this little oasis right as the vultures are coming into roost on, 3 little trees, and the bats are starting to come out. A lesser nighthawk passed by. But I also saw a bird that flew in from open desert, and it must have been a purple martin coming in to roost. I couldn't get a better look at the bird without flushing the vultures off the trees. So I didn't do that. But that's been the highlight over the last few days. But excited to talk about Alaska with you guys.
Nice. Western purple martins, they've got to split those at some point. That looks like a different beast altogether to my eyes, at least.
At least as different as all the other martins that I can't identify, right? So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Phil, where are you right now and what you've been seeing?
I'm hanging out in Albuquerque. It's good to be here with you guys. Always fun to chat with you. I think Alex and I have known each other since we were about, 15 or something like that. It's been a while. Actually, have my longest break in a couple years from tours right now. So mostly hanging out in Albuquerque. I was just in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, though, visiting some family for like a week. Had some really nice midsummer going on the Upper Great Lakes, which is always a surprise. So, yeah, stopped by and saw that kelp gull in Milwaukee. There was a black-headed gull hanging out in kind of like around Saginaw, Michigan, and then saw 3 or 4 little gulls, including a really nice alternate plumage bird kind of around Manitowoc and in northeast Wisconsin on the way back down. A real highlight for me, I think, was seeing cerulean warblers again, though. I stopped right off the highway in Dubuque, Iowa, which is has been a shocker for me as one of the prettiest cities I've seen in a long time that I didn't know about. Just little city on the Mississippi, big riparian forest, and yellow-throated warblers, prothonotary, ceruleans, that kind of stuff, which you don't really associate with Iowa. At least I didn't until then. So that was, probably my highlight for July.
That's awesome. I've heard about that area actually from, I think, Greg Neese. We talked about actually trying to do an ABA event there at one point back when I was at ABA. And it sounds like for breeding birds, pretty fantastic area. But what I'd love to know is, what are the little gulls doing on the Great Lakes? Are they, it seems like they're always around.
They breed somewhere, and they breed colonially, and sometimes I think people know where a colony is, and sometimes they don't. Okay. The biggest one and the most stable one was at Long Point in Ontario, I think through the 80s. And so they used to be really common in Lake Erie in the 80s and 90s. And now it seems like I know they found some birds trying to nest in the UP a couple of years ago, I think. And so now it seems more like northern Lake Michigan is the spot where they get them most frequently in the country at this point. But they're breeding somewhere.
This is a surprisingly good time of year, actually, to see them around here. I think I've seen little gulls at least half a dozen times in Delaware in particular in July and even early August. Young birds pretty much exclusively. So I don't know what that's about, but it is a thing.
Are they anything like Bonaparte's gulls in that they're breeding around bogs and muskegs and staying away from other large gull colonies that might be on the Great Lakes closer to the coastline? Do you know anything about that?
I know they're marsh breeders. I don't know if they're as far north as Bonaparte's where they're nesting in those kind of muskeg habitats. I don't think they're tree nesters. I think they're ground nesters. I don't know. I haven't seen a colony, but I always kind of picture them in the same sort of stuff as black terns, but kind of open marshland. Yeah, I'd love to see them nesting somewhere for sure. It's best gull in North America.
So
right?
breeding adult little gull is pretty tough to beat.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that is good stuff. I will share that I was on the eastern shore of Maryland this past weekend, and I experienced something I have never experienced before.
Go on.
And I had some friends down to our little place in Maryland, and we were hanging out on the edge of the water. And one of our friends said, "You know what? I'm going to go for a little midnight paddleboard, excursion." And we were like, "Okay, yeah, sure. That sounds interesting." And so we kind of went with them. And wouldn't you know it, he like immediately fell off of his paddleboard, but in so doing, stirred up a whole bunch of little dinoflagellates that lit up. And we were experiencing a what I thought of as was going to be phosphorescence. Like they talk about those phosphorescent bays or bioluminescent bays. This was bioluminescence. It sounds like some kind of little dinoflagellate that is seen on occasion in the Chesapeake Bay. I've been there my entire life, never even knew it was a possibility. They call them, what do they call them? Like sea sparkles, I think is what the old captains, fishermen's, seafaring folk used to call them way back in the day, were sea sparkles. And it almost like if you like whooshed your hands through the water, it almost looked like you had there was like little tiny sparklers, which was pretty wild, I got to say.
Alex, you ever get those in the toilets on the Seabird or the Sea Lion?
Yes. On some of the ships that Phil and I are on every now and then, we take in water into the plumbing system. And so all that seawater, and occasionally you'll get bioluminescent dinoflagellates as well. And
Wow.
So you're getting up in the middle of the night and like peeing right into this toilet, and then all of a sudden it's just sparkling up. And the first time that I ever experienced that, I was like in a brain fog. It's like 2 a.m, and it took me a moment to really understand what was going on. Yeah, for like the duration of that pee, I was perplexed.
Exactly. You're looking, you're like, I don't think I had asparagus. I don't know what's going on here.
Imagine being, like the perspective of your friend falling in and everything just goes white for a moment as you're going into the water.
Oh my God. I did not know that was even a possibility either.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Bioluminescence in the toilet. Yeah.
One of the many wonders of Alaska.
Seriously. Man. Yeah, you guys do a ton of cruises as well to various places with Lindblad. Both of you guys do cruises for Lindblad and also tours for Hillstar. And both have all three of us have spent a ton of time in Alaska. And I think St. Paul Island and the Pribilofs was pretty critical for each of us in terms of our early Alaska experience. When did you first make it to Alaska, Alex?
I got up there in 2016, and I was working for a company based on the Kenai Peninsula, so South Central Alaska for those tuning in. So access through Anchorage, and mostly spending my time on the peninsula about 2 hours south of Anchorage. Later on, started doing stuff in Denali, and then actually Phil helped to get me into St. Paul Island. I think that was 2018, and I was texting Phil, and Phil was kind of helping me make the connection there. So
you got to get out here, man. He's like, you got to get out here.
Yeah.
Yep. So I owe Phil big time on that. And I originally was supposed to go study Dunlin up in the North Slope, but the funding for that fell through back in 2016. But a friend of mine who was doing some guiding for Alaska Wildland Adventures sent me to them and ended up going there. Didn't think that I would love that part of the state because I wanted to be closer to the Bering Sea or the Arctic, but it was life-changing, and I love the entirety of that state. Yeah, so that's when I first got up there. What about Phil? Phil, when did you get up there for the first time?
17. It was the same sort of thing where I had a field job fall through last minute and they desperately needed a guide on St. Paul. They had to replace somebody and so they were like, can you be out here in 3 days? And I said, sure. And I think that's probably why I got the job, was just immediate availability. But I didn't spend any time on the Alaska mainland in the first 9 months I spent in Alaska. It was all St. Paul.
That's the same for me.
Yeah, never got a mosquito bite. It took me like 3 years to get a mosquito bite in Alaska, which was pretty nice.
That is so wild to never have been in Alaska and then be plopped down in the middle of the Bering Sea on this island. That's, to me, that's just, it's wild, but I expect nothing short of that for you, Phil. That's crazy.
Yeah, that was the same for me. I think it was 2002. And I remember I arrived, we had like a couple days orientation in Anchorage, and then we were out on St. Paul like by the 5th of May or something. And then I didn't come back until towards the end of August. And I remember when I arrived from Philly thinking that Anchorage, I was like, oh, it's kind of a fun, dinky little town. And but it's, it's cool. It's got its own vibe. And then I came back from, after 4 or 5 months or whatever it was out on St. Paul and was like, my God, this place looks like Tokyo. Seemed like this booming metropolis. I was like, oh my God, I'm like scared here. I'm going to get hit by traffic. But yeah, and then I started traveling around a little bit after that. But
definitely a frontier town, Anchorage.
It is. It is.
Have not heard it compared to Tokyo yet. Very generous.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to hear about some of your experiences in Alaska and maybe talk about some of our favorite places. I think for me, probably my favorite place of all that I've been to is Nome. It just has a certain majesty to it. It's remote. It's still got some pretty good, couple good restaurants, really, like maybe just 2, but it's got incredible scenery, fabulous birding, good chances at mammals, and also good chances at rare mammals and rare birds. So you feel like every minute that you're out in the wilderness there's the chance to see something extraordinary. And even the things that are expected and not surprising at all are still thrilling. Seeing red-throated loons just at all the little coastal ponds displaying or on nests in breeding plumage. That's red-throated loon is a common bird here along the coast in our winter months, but almost never do we see them in breeding plumage. Up there, they're just flying around, calling, making a racket, and taking all sorts of cool poses. You drive a little further, you got long-tailed Jaegers sprinkled all over the tundra, chasing other birds, or just looking like they're having a good time standing in a real pretty spot. Plus, there's the rarities element. You never know what you could turn up there, and yet it's routine to see things like bristle-thighed curlew and blue throat there. That's probably my favorite place. Phil, what do you have what would you say is your favorite spot in Alaska? Is it Nome also, or maybe you've got even a different place?
I mean, it's hard to say anything less than spectacular about Nome, right? I mean, it's that combination of you've got all the great breeding birds and resident things. You've got the vagrant potential. You've got a good road system, which is really rare in remote parts of Alaska, like being able to drive 60, 70 miles in 3 different directions is almost unheard of in those kind of smaller remote Alaska towns, especially in Western Alaska and North Slope. A lot of the time you just get a couple of miles of road around town. And so having that potential to explore. I really like Utqiagvik and Barrow. That's probably my favorite, being there right on the edge of thaw out. It's like, it's been different every year I've been there. Like sometimes the tundra is completely open. This year, I think it was the latest thaw out on record they have. So I landed, everything was completely locked up in ice. But you still have that 24 hours of daylight. You've got, it's really underrated in terms of vagrant potential up there too. I mean, they've had some incredible birds show up there, and geographically, I mean, there's a point, but there's not like a whole lot there that feels like a vagrant trap. And then, yeah, eiders. I mean, getting to when things thaw out and you can just kind of drive to the edge of town, and there's these little melt puddles with Steller's eiders and spectacled eiders and king eiders in them, and pectoral sandpipers flying around displaying. And yeah, I have a hard time not staying up the entire night. So it's good that I'm only there for like 4 or 5 days in a row. I'll usually stay out until about 3 a.m. and then sleep for 3 hours and meet people for breakfast at 6:30. I could do that for a few days, but any longer and I'd pay the price.
Yeah, it's an amazing place.
Ooh, I guess I'm up next.
Yeah, man.
I think it's got to be Nome for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. I think it's just so dynamic. It's got the birds that are characteristic of Beringia, right? The areas bordering the Bering Sea. You've got that vagrant potential, and even though I think that can be a lot higher in a place like St. Paul Island or over in Gamble on St. Lawrence Island, of course, the Aleutians, it's still incredible that those birds find their way to the coast and that you can find them along the coastline on the road system. And then also, yeah, the mammals. The potential for wolverine anywhere seems especially as good as anywhere else in a place like Nome. I've never seen one, but you know that they're around there. It's a great habitat for them, especially on Cougar Rock and parts of Council Road. So I've had common cuckoo in Nome. I've had some other amazing birds in Nome. And
yeah, that's a fair statement. Yeah. Why don't you tell folks about the weed ear? I mean, that must have been a crazy experience.
Yeah, this was probably, maybe certainly the most exciting moment of my quote unquote birding career. I was out in Nome for the first time. This is 2017. And I was in between breaks on the Kenai, or in between trips on the Kenai Peninsula. I had about a week off. So I caught a ride up to Anchorage, then flew out to Nome with a bunch of dried food and food I got at REI. Rented an SUV and then drove around Nome for a few days. And I gave myself extra time because I was out there in early July. So the chances of blue throat it's a lot more difficult, as you both know, when they're not singing. Mm-hmm. And so I gave myself a whole extra day. Well, I went up Cougar Rock and got the blue throat, bristle-thighed curlew, gyrfalcons up there, and then decided to go do something festive for 4th of July. And so drove back into town. That wasn't the plan. I was originally going to stay out in Cougar Rock Road, and then walked into a bar in Nome, and then decided it wasn't for me that night, and decided I'm just going to go.
Special kind. Yeah.
I am not that special kind. So I drove out to Cape Nome to see if I could maybe spot a very distant crested auklet or an alcid out there. And at I think it was about 10 p.m., I got up to Point Nome, pulled over the car, and pretty quickly noticed this songbird on the beach there, just under kind of where the breakwater is, sheltered from the wind, as good as that bird could be at the time, and saw the bird. Didn't recognize this bird at all from illustrations. I knew that I hadn't seen this bird in my lifetime. And about 7 inches long, mostly on the ground, not really running, but making short sallies out. And when the bird would sally out, I could see that it was mostly brown on the head, the nape, the upper wings, no wing bars. But what caught my attention right away was the amount of white in the outer tail feathers. And so I figured this must be a wheat ear, but having not been to a lot of Central Asia or Northern Africa at the time, I didn't know what other families it could be, but I had a strong suspicion this was a wheat ear and not a northern wheat ear. So I took photographs, observed the bird for a little bit, and didn't have any signal where I was. But I wanted to figure out what this bird was. I knew that it was unusual. Didn't think it might be a first ABA record at the time, but took some back of camera photos, drove up about a quarter mile from the parking area so that I could get some signal over in Nome. And I think it had like 1 or 2 bars of 4G or 5G, just enough to send some photos out. on Facebook Messenger. Phil was actually one of the people that I messaged about this, and Phil didn't know what it was. He just knew it was a weed ear as well. And Tom Johnson, who was awake for some reason, I sent something to him. I just basically looked at who was on Facebook and just messaged them. And he's like, I don't know what that is, but starts directing me
when
towards
Phil and Tom Johnson aren't sure what it is, that's when you're like, okay, yeah.
I remember when neither one of them knew. I'm like, oh man, I'm onto something here. And I messaged somebody in Israel who was up, and he Jonathan Mayrev, and he immediately said, this looks like a variable weed ear or pied weed ear. And so I posted on my Facebook, I posted other places on Facebook, and then drove down to find camp, slept for like 5 hours, and then went back to find the bird. The bird was there. And there was a couple that I had run into at the airport that were like brand new birders. And I talked to them briefly, and when I asked them what they're looking for, they're like, oh, we don't know. We just heard Nome was good for birds. And so they didn't have like an objective. Well, they were around there. And I remember frantically getting their attention and being like, stop what you're doing. You have to look at this bird. And I could just see that they were like so confused as to why I was so adamant that they look at this bird.
Like, what's up with this weird dude? Yeah.
I could see it in their eyes. They were thinking that. And I'm like, if anyone else, like you, other two people might be the only people to see this bird. And it ended up being a pied weed ear. Facebook sorted it out for me. I didn't actually identify the bird. And I found out that it was a pied weed ear. And then the bird actually stuck around a few weeks. People started to come in from other parts of Alaska. Big ear birders ended up there. So yeah, that was for me probably the only ABA record I'll ever have. And such a cool place to get it over on Cape Nome.
Yeah, I just did a little digging and I found the original message, July 5th, 2017, 12:09 a.m. Yo! Followed by, still in the like, I don't know what I'm looking at. And then you're on St. Paul, and so pretty limited access to international field guides. And I don't know.
Internet.
Yeah, I don't remember if the internet really did much of anything back then. I can't remember. I don't remember it being able to load much more than text messages or emails. But no, that was the cool bird. It's weird to be sitting on St. Paul and like antsy to get off St. Paul to go chase a vagrant somewhere else in Alaska. It feels like the little bus of birder privilege, right? Where you're just like, you're in a great spot, but there's always something else going on there.
Uh-huh.
Damn. Could have been me.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. I've never had anything quite that rare myself in Alaska. I remember being on St. Paul when I think it was Luke DeChico found rufous-tailed robin. That was pretty exciting. But in terms of like self-found vagrants, I think the most exciting time I had was, again, my first year in Alaska. And it was on St. Lawrence Island at Gamble. And it was one of my first tours I did with Wings. And Paul Lehman, who's a real mentor of mine. And I was actually the cook / second guide, which most of my friends really get a kick out of because nobody really considers me much of a gourmet. But nonetheless, I heated up that lasagna like nobody's business and do make a pretty good tuna salad, I dare say. But I do remember that we did a week-long tour. We had North America's first willow warbler during that tour, which is, of course, now not such a big deal anymore, really. But at the time, there had been zero prior to that. And then the group left, and I booked myself a couple extra days out there on St. Lawrence at Gamble at the lodge. Just ended up that I was the only birder there for about 3 or 4 days. And Paul went back to Nome with the group, and then the group departed from Nome to go back home, and Paul was then to come back after birding for a couple days in Nome. And I remember that he knew I needed Arctic loon and rock ptarmigan at the time were 2 birds I needed, and he knew he was likely to get them. So he called me up from St. Lawrence Island just to turn the knife a little bit, to insert the knife and turn it a little bit. And he was like, well, George, we had a good day here in Nome, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And he was like, at the end of the day, we had a beautiful rock ptarmigan with Arctic loon, drifting by in the background, something like that. And I was like, all right, well, and I was like, well, there's a reed bunting here. And at the time there was that was the first fall record for, out in Attu, reed buntings were a pretty regular one, but this was the first fall one. And I don't think there were many spring ones for St. Lawrence Island. So it was a pretty good bird. And Paul went silent, and I could tell he was itching. He was like, oh man. And so the next morning he's supposed to fly back. So I go out to see if the reed bunting is still there. And then I get to where the phone is. It's a payphone, right? It's like, pre-cell era, but he knows the payphone number. So he calls the payphone number to find out if it's still there, because his flight was been delayed getting in. And he's like, hey, is the reed bunting still there? And I was like, yep, it's still there. But there's also a Siberian accentor, a dusky warbler, and a yellow-browed warbler, which I'd found all that morning by myself. And I was like, I remember hearing the dusky warbler and being like, huh, there's a junco out here. It sounded like a junco or like a Lincoln sparrow, that kind of lip-smacking call note.
Little marble click. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I look over and I was like, that is not a junco. And then I saw something else moving and had the Siberian accentor and then picked up this little Philoscopus flying around. It eventually got views enough to tell it was a yellow-browed warbler, which was only a second for North America at that time. So that was a pretty good haul. And of course, Paul did get in eventually, got all the birds, and he was a happy camper. But for that day or so, yeah, that was a pretty exciting vagrant event. Yeah, it was good.
Spend enough time in Alaska, especially like the Bering Sea area, and you're going to have some days like that, and you're also going to have some days where the birds just get away from you. You're going to be like on the tarmac leaving when a hot bird comes in, and that's just the way it goes, and the more time you spend there, the more stories you're going to have like that.
Yeah. And birds that you just catch the tail end of going over a little hill, and that's all there is. I remember there's a big storm my first fall on St. Paul, and I dropped all kinds of stuff like green sandpiper, dark-sided flycatcher, rose finch, that kind of stuff. But I was driving down the road with Cameron Cox, and we had some big dark brown thing that looked like an acrocephalus warbler, like one of the reed warblers, just pop off the side of the road and go out and drop maybe 200 meters out in the Putschke. I probably spent 3 hours just walking in circles back there and never saw the thing again. And so
gone.
Yeah. There's not an equal number of those, but
yeah,
there's a lot of those. Yeah, those ones you remember more than.
Yeah, they're painful.
Yeah,
they linger for sure. George, you have any like that? You have to.
I do. I have one where, like, the one that comes to mind is from Nome, and it was right around that Hastings Creek.
Yeah,
where I pulled up, and on, I think it was like the mile marker sign there, or a post. There's it was really foggy and misty. The visibility was not good, but there's a medium-sized falcon just sitting on that post, and it nipped off. And I just didn't see it very well. But if you ask me, if I had to guess, I would guess it was a Eurasian hobby, but which I've seen a lot of elsewhere.
Oh, yeah. Close to my best day on St. Paul was involved a Eurasian hobby. It was just a good spring migration. Big group of birds dropped in, all kinds of stuff. And there was a bird tour group on the island that I was showing around. And normally this would be a fantastic thing for that. But it was a bird quest group, and they were almost all English. And I was screaming about this hobby, and they're like, yeah, can we get to the cliffs to go look at red-legged kittiwakes? And then there's common cuckoo flying across the road. Yeah, exactly. It's just we're going to spend some time with snow buntings, and I'm pulling my hair out. It's the, one day of the entire season that you have a big Siberian bird fall out, and you've got 12 people that really don't care. Oh. Understandable. I mean, they kind of put it in perspective on what's globally special about Alaska, right? You get so caught up in looking at backyard birds from Japan that like sometimes you forget that you're in this place where you can't go anywhere else on the planet to see these birds nesting, essentially.
Yeah,
Such a good point. Yeah, we think about the vagrants there, but the fact that you're there and red-legged kittiwake is a bird you can see every day, sometimes really closely. There's something to be said for that, for sure.
Yeah.
Red phalaropes, right? I mean, just getting to go there and there's red phalaropes in everybody's front yard in Utqiagvik. And yeah, I mean, just getting to see alcids on the cliffs. Like, I love pelagic birds. I don't love boats. And so getting to see seabirds where I'm not actively seasick is one of the great joys in life. And going to like Kenai Fjords or something like that too.
Kenai Fjords is stunning. Yeah, red phalarope, Phil, was our top 5 bird for the group Alex and I guided this year. The top 5 birds were king eider, Pacific loon, actually, which I think is a great choice. Wouldn't necessarily be obvious. That was tied with snow bunting, which Maryland changed. We all started calling them snow dumplings after a while, which I really liked. But yeah, red phalaropes, I don't think people are prepared for. A lot of people probably see them on the ocean, for the first time, or maybe some small coastal pond or even an inland pond, or small lake or something as a migrant. Seeing those things in breeding plumage, spinning around like tops in little ponds at the side of the road, practically at arm's length, is pretty tough to beat.
Totally. Yeah, we see them when they're gray phalaropes.
Exactly.
Over in Europe. Yeah, and then we see them there so close, chasing each other, courting, observing the females and the males nearby one another and observing just how much more vibrant the females are. They're just such a sweet bird. And yeah, they're just in people's front yards. If there's a puddle, they're red phalaropes.
This actually reminds me, Alex, I don't know if you would have seen this or not, but within our group, remember there was a sharp-tailed sandpiper that was reported up in Utqiagvik in Barrow while we were there. And it turned out to be in an area that we had visited, and we spent a lot of time just engrossed in observing red phalaropes. And we were just digging them, just like absorbing them. They were super close. And one of our friends, Natalie, kind of had wandered off from the group a little bit, took a few photos of some different things. After the tour, she's going through her photos. She's like, wait, what's this one? And she has a beautiful photo of a breeding plumage sharp-tailed sandpiper that
no way
is right down, just right.
Man,
yeah.
Well, good for her.
We were there. Yeah.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah.
Yep. It was pretty funny. Those things happen.
Yeah. I had one of those on St. Paul with somebody who felt bad about asking me about every Lapland longspur that they saw, and so they stopped asking, and then at dinner showed me a picture of a female common rosefinch. And I was like, yep, everybody put down your forks. We're getting in the van. Long gone, but, it was still.
Yeah, that actually came up on a trip. I'm trying to remember if it was in Alaska or not, that the old expression, if you see something, say something. It is okay to not be sure what something is. And it is okay to ask your guide if you're unsure, and it is much better to do that in the moment than later, if at all possible. Sometimes it's just the way it is, right? You photograph something and you think you know what it is, and then you get back and you're like, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was. And that happens. But if in the moment you're not sure, go ahead and ask us, because we'd rather know then.
That's such a good reminder for us guides, to encourage people to speak up. It can be tempting to just kind of say, yeah, it's another Lapland longspur, it's another pictorial sandpiper. But every now and then somebody sees something, and it's good to encourage them and not brush it off, right? Because those do happen, and they happen probably once a trip, I think.
I feel like that.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of brings to mind like my favorite part of the vagrancy thing in Alaska, which is less about the birds themselves and more about the kind of the learning opportunities, right? Because especially with shorebirds on a place like St. Paul, I think it has the highest shorebird list of any single location on the planet, right? There's like 55, 60 species of shorebirds that have been recorded there.
That's
and
nuts.
So when you look at something, you actually have to consider every possibility. You don't just say like, it's a semi-palmated sandpiper, it's a dunlin, it's a greater yellowlegs. Like, you actually have to kind of learn how to justify your IDs of things a little better, and you put a little more time in. And I mean, you can do it without vagrant potential, but just for me, like having that little carrot dangling there to like take more time, study birds better, look at them a little closer is just kind of another special thing about time in Alaska, especially Western Alaska.
Yeah. We mentioned the mammals a little bit. I feel like we should talk about them a little bit. One of the, I actually haven't seen a grizzly bear for a couple of years now in Alaska. And almost most of the ones I've seen have been kind of en route to Kenai Fjords or especially in Denali. And I've seen them in Nome as well. But I've always kind of been either in the vehicle or very close to a vehicle. I've never really had any close encounters with them, but it's kind of, when people think of Alaska, they think of grizzly bears. And currently, they're a little harder to see than they used to be, just because the good part of the road in Denali is inaccessible due to a landslide there. It sounds like it's going to be cleared up in the next couple of years. Maybe, I don't think by next year, but maybe by 2027, if I heard correctly. But one place that we can see grizzly bears is Nome, and one of the famous areas is the Bristletide Curlew area, which is a hike. It's one of the few real hikes that birders tend to do on an Alaska tour. And I just remember my buddy Chris Benish one year saying he was up there with his group with field guides, and they were kind of scanning around, I think, from the hillside, atop this is Coffee Dome, as you call it. You hike up the hill, I guess, opposite Coffee Dome. Technically, everyone refers to the whole area as Coffee Dome, but you hike up this dome, and it's this big, massive dome where you have once you get towards the top, you really have a beautiful view of the tundra. In fact, I took a good picture of Alex there that you can see on the Hillstar site currently for our Alaska tour. Gives you a good sense of the lay of the land there. But Chris was up there with his group, and there was a woman on his tour. I think he had 6 or 7, 8 people with him. One of the ladies said to him, "Is that a bear?" And he was he was kind of expecting to he kind of lazily wheeled around to take a look and was kind of expecting to see some dot, way out on the horizon, and instead sees a grizzly bear galloping, trundling over the tundra directly towards them, only, I don't know, something like 400 or 500 feet away. And was like, "Oh my God, that is a bear." So they did the thing where they put their arms up and they started screaming and hollering, and pretty quickly it stood up and walked in the other direction, and just, it was funny. They said actually it was running and then stopped and just kind of wandered off. But yeah, I love seeing grizzly bears. I don't really want to see them on foot too close. And I'm very thankful that bear spray has become so widely available. I know, Alex, in the Southeast in particular, you frequent a lot of areas with bears. But yeah, did you see any bears on your trips this year, or have you had close encounters in the past?
We definitely get a lot of coastal brown bears down in Southeast, especially this time of year. They're congregating near the rivers where salmon are. And we do some hikes out in meadows where you definitely have a chance of seeing coastal brown bears. I have not had a close encounter with a brown bear where I felt like I was, at risk in some way. There's always a little risk when you're around them, but they're not really actively seeking you out. My guess with Chris's story from Coffee Dome is that bear may have caught a whiff of something and was going directly towards the scent. And then when recognized that there's a group of people, lost interest really quickly. Sometimes you see brown bear just take off in a gallop like that. If you're watching them from a distance and they're not running towards a group of people, they might just be, following a scent nose and running after that scent because, chances are that there's competition out there. So they're going after it. I have actually had a few encounters with black bear where I didn't quite know what the black bear's intent was. And one really sticks out to me. This was one where I had the bear spray out, and in hindsight, I probably should have sprayed this bear just to teach this bear a lesson, and also, potentially mitigate another situation from happening with other people in this area. But this would have been over in Kenai Fjords National Park. So this is on the Kenai Peninsula, not far from Seward and a little farther away from Homer for those of you that don't know where this national park is. And it's recently deglaciated. Black bears are more quick to go populate areas that are deglaciated than brown bears. I think they're just better climbers and they can get over those crevasses a little bit better of ice. And so I'm in an area that has a pretty good population of black bears. I've seen black bears out there many times. And I'm on this hike with one other person. This is part of a natural history tour, and it's just me and this other person doing this hike that I've done probably 40 or 50 times. It's like a mile and a half to a overlooking a fjord and some alpine lakes. And we're walking up this trail through salmonberry and alder, so not trees, but like shrubs. And when we stop at the lookout, something catches our eye and we turn around and there's a black bear, probably a 3 or 4-year-old, looks smaller, not full grown, but not with a parent, and was kind of walking towards us, focused on us. And so I get the bear spray out and we do exactly what, we're taught to do or told to do, which is just stand our ground, talk to the bear, and just say, hey, bear, whatever comes to mind. Just making sure that the bear knows we're not going to budge, that we see the bear. And we don't have a lot of places to go. Not that we felt like running, but we're on a ridge. And to down climb would have been us going into the alders. So we were pretty comfortable where we were, considering our options. And we took very small steps backwards as the bear kept going. And it felt like for every step back we took, the bear took 2 or 3 more. Probably got within 20 feet, maybe a little less than that, and was just checking us out, and eventually walked off a different direction and began eating some vegetation down the slope. And we just watched that bear until we were satisfied that it had lost interest and then got out of there. Not before finding a rock ptarmigan, which was really cool to see at that site, a little farther down slope than you usually expect to see them, but that's neither here nor there.
We'll bear with you. Yeah.
I remember being excited about that rock ptarmigan and like focusing on the rock ptarmigan and being like, wait a second, there's a bear that was checking us out just a moment ago. The thing that sticks out with black bears to me is that they're not as defensive like a brown bear, right? Like if you run into a brown bear and the brown bear didn't know that you were there, there's a higher likelihood that brown bear is going to fight back and win rather quickly, whereas a black bear is going to most likely run off. But black bears are actually a little bit more likely to see you as food and actually stalk you. And I think it was that same year there were 2 events in Alaska where people were stalked and killed by black bears. So they're 2 very different creatures, and I tend not to worry about black bears that much, but every now and then they do something that breaks the rules. And I remember somebody saying that black bears are harmless until they're not. Somebody who had studied black bears, brown bears, and polar bears in Alaska for a long time. That's what he had to say about black bears. So still a little unpredictable, those ones. That's my best bear story, I think. Do you guys have any?
About, I guess maybe 4 years ago or so. It was like one of my first tours after like the initial COVID shutdowns. It was October, and I was up in Utqiagvik doing a Ross's Gull trip. And it was the first day there. The folks I was with were kind of tired, and they just decided to rest in the hotel. And I was going to go out and do a sea watch and see if Ross's gulls had started moving, right? Because every fall they do this migration from where they migrate west from the Chukchi to the Beaufort Sea and then back, kind of seeking seasonal food. Parked the van on the long side of the road, kind of out near the Cape in Barrow, out by the point, and was standing pretty close to the van, and I just had my face, stuck down in the scope, and you just kind of get lost sometimes when you're scoping back and forth.
Tunnel vision.
Yeah, exactly. Real tunnel vision. I don't know what prompted it, but I just kind of looked up. And when I looked up, I lifted my head, and there was a polar bear that was in the water and had just popped, just its head was poking up above the water. So it's early fall, nothing's iced up yet. And it just immediately like left the scope, turned around, ran, and just like got inside the van. And it popped its head back down and just kind of disappeared again. But you just realize that, like, oh, right, these animals could spend a long time underwater and move completely under the water. And then all of a sudden there's just this head there. And it's,
they hunt seals, right?
Yeah, it's a good reminder to try to stay pretty aware of your surroundings at all times. Most of the time, I'm not too worried about bear encounters on tours in Alaska, especially when you're in groups of 12 or whatever, but it is a really good tool to keep people from wandering off on their own on tours, right? You tell them about bears and suddenly you don't have somebody who's a half mile behind the group doing their own thing.
Yeah,
terrifying.
But yeah, polar bears
that's a different thing. That's a different animal.
And
literally.
it was, super late thaw out in Utqiagvik this year, and there were polar bears everywhere the week I was there, which was really, really cool to see.
Yeah, I think you just were ahead of us a few days there, and we had pretty good bear experiences as well. But it sounded like just generally it was a good time for them up there this year. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, Alex, you gave a pretty good rundown of the bears for our group and what to do. Sort of like black bear, do this. Grizzly bear, this is what's recommended. Polar bears.
Yep. Not much you can do about a polar bear. If that thing is tracking you and wants to eat you, then unless you're prepared, that very well could happen.
Yeah. Even if you're prepared. I remember at a wildlife biologist conference I went to in college, talking to a biologist from Alaska that worked up there, and they had a polar bear that was going into a village repeatedly and really kind of becoming a pretty constant threat to people. And so they ended up killing it, and they did a necropsy on the bear. And when they were doing the dissection, they found a slug from a handgun in the roof of the mouth of the bear that had healed over.
Oh my God.
So somebody had already shot this bear in the head at close range at some point, and
he kept on trucking.
Yeah. Didn't slow him down too much, at least not for a couple of years. So yeah, they're
an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to always on those trips wonder if we should have firearms on just a couple sites. And I always felt like, geez, I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but bear spray gives me so much more peace of mind. And I know some people say that for polar bears, it might be of limited use, but certainly for grizzlies, which to me just kind of remind me of a really big dog and like that nose that just looks like a giant sponge. I got to think that, bear spray is going to be a massive, massive deterrent to those guys. I feel much better carrying that.
Totally.
Yeah. As long as you know how to use it. Right. I remember going into Glacier National Park a few years ago, and they had a sign up that said, "Warning, bear spray is not bear repellent. Do not spray yourself or others." And just the idea that you'd think it's like a bottle off and you give yourself a nice coat of bear spray before going on a hike. It's really...
I remember testing out, like, it's one of the ones I got. I usually try to give them a little bit of a test. Now we usually have a couple, so you figure one of them is going to work. But the first time I bought it, I just tested it out a little bit to make sure that it was actually going to spray if, we had an encounter. And I was like, okay, this thing's working. And then got distracted by birds. And then I realized it was kind of wafting back slowly. And just the faintest bit of that, I started like coughing and feeling it in my eyes. And I was like, I got to get out of here. Like, it's like I sprayed it way over there, but man, that stuff is pretty powerful.
Yeah. Well, real quick before we kind of wrap things up, one thing I'd been interested in asking you guys about is like, where's one part of Alaska that you haven't been to yet that really high on your list in terms of like, right? Because there's so much room for places to explore. You kind of go to the places you can because of accessibility, but it's an endless state in terms of regions to check out.
I'm curious to hear from Alex. I'm also curious if the first place that you think of is the first place that I think of is the place that Phil's thinking of. But Alex,
is it Wales?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Wales.
Ooh, okay. It might be all of us. Why Wales?
And Diomede.
Oh, yeah. Right next to Wales.
Yeah.
I think dovekies breed on Diomede.
Yeah.
which you guys know that there's big Diomede and little Diomede, and little Diomede is US, that's on US soil, and then big Diomede right across like a little strait is owned by Russia, and both are occupied. So there's like military watching each other, like they could almost like see each other from that distance using scopes.
It's a Dateline runs through there too, right? Does Dateline run? So it's like you're literally looking at tomorrow or whatever. Depending on
because of various time zone rigmarole, they're not actually 24 hours apart. It's only like 16 or 17 because Russia and the US have both shifted time zones a little bit in that part of the world. And yeah. But yeah, Wales, right? I mean, that's where the Bering Strait was. That's where the land bridge was. Like, that's kind of...
The tip of the Seward Peninsula as well reaches really, really far west towards Russia. It looks like, yeah, I mean, it would be the closest point of land for some birds that would be straying from Russia. And also you would think just geographically it might concentrate stuff. Be a good place for seabirds potentially moving through.
Looks great for a sea watch, and it's far south enough that any birds leaving Siberia and trending south could end up there. It seems like it has gnome potential, plus maybe more sea watching and more possibility for Asian birds.
And North American vagrants too, probably, I bet. You could envision, some North American songbirds or whatever that were just, moving the wrong direction or overshooting and ended up kind of concentrated and corralled there by that peninsula.
Man, sometimes those are just as exciting as the Siberian stuff when you've been out there long enough, right? Like, I remember being on St. Paul and seeing a northern flicker flying across the road and just like screaming and waving my arms, and everyone in the van's just kind of like, yeah, it's a flicker. You're like, no, but look where we are.
That's wild.
Like, yeah, there's no trees.
Yeah, I cannot picture that. Yeah.
But yeah, no, Wales seems incredible. There's just all these little spots on the coast that I feel like people used to go to a little more often or visit, at least, like Wainwright, which is I think a couple 100 miles west of Utqiagvik on the North Slope. There's a record from 1914 of a flock of like a dozen spoon-billed sandpipers up there. I don't know. You think like everywhere on the coast up there has to have the potential to find weird stuff. And then also you have all the cool breeding birds there, right? Like there's still going to be eiders and loons and red knots and Jaegers and all that
juicy stuff.
One place that our friend Andy Banker brought up to me a couple weeks ago is Point Hope, and that's going to be north of Wales. It's going to be that northwestern part of Alaska, and it's on the Chukchi Sea, so the sea ice probably extends down to there, and there's this big peninsula that shoots out into the sea. It's any birds coming along there might be heading into Kotzebue Sound, so there's a pretty large area that might be ice-free nowadays for wintering birds, and so great sea watching. But he said that in May would be probably really good for ivory gulls, and that's not a really a bird you can reliably see in Alaska in many places. That's an honorable mention for me. Point Hope.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's really...
Yeah, one, Phil, on our trip that we just did, the Alaska Outposts Hillstar trip, Alex got his state redhead for his Alaska list, and man, he was juiced. He was fired up.
Yeah, I got my state mourning dove last year down by Sitka. I flushed it off a beach, and I remember that being like my highlight of at least for birds down in Southeast Alaska in early fall. It's just like, you're like, oh, there's cedar waxwings here. You might even get a cowbird. There's been a house sparrow around Juneau I could chase. Like,
whoa.
Yeah.
I had a cowbird. I had a cowbird at Utqiagvik once. That was pretty exciting.
Whoa.
Yeah. Up at Bear at Utqiagvik. It was right the same area we had the ermine, Alex. There was brown-headed cowbird once sitting up on a wire. That was cool.
Amazing.
Yeah, people were, they were beside themselves over the cowbird, as you can just imagine. Yeah.
Amazing. Alaska's full of surprises.
That's right.
Can't wait to head back.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you guys both so much for being here. Folks should definitely go to the Hillstar Nature site, check out Alaska Outposts. Noam and Utqiagvik, Phil and Alex will be going there the 4th through the 14th of June next year. There is still space. So yeah, go with those guys. You'll have a blast. And yeah, Alex, Phil, thanks so much, guys. Hope you guys have a great rest of the day and a great week ahead.
Back at you, George.
All right, cheers. And thanks for listening, everybody. Life List will be back again soon.
See ya.